President Jacob Zuma has filed an appeal to the court ruling that he is too conflicted to appoint the head of the National Prosecuting Authority. President Zuma's legal team has confined its appeal to the one aspect of the ruling which states that for as long as Zuma is president, the deputy president shall be responsible for appointing the prosecution's boss. Zuma's legal team argues that the court made a mistake by finding that he is unable to perform his powers as president in relation to the NPA head, while he's able to perform his other functions as the head of state. The North Gauteng High Court ruled last month that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa should make the appointment within 60 days. At the same time, the court ruled the appointment of prosecution's head Shaun Abrahams was invalid. It said Zuma could not appoint a new prosecution's boss because there is a conflict in that the NPA is deciding whether to bring back charges of fraud and corruption against him. Legal expert Paul Ngobeni joins us on the phone line to give us his legal view. A very good morning to you, Mr. Ngobeni. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, do you think that the court was wrong in their ruling?
Good morning. I think the court was definitely wrong in its ruling. It was wrong in ruling that the settlement agreement between Mr. Ngasana and the executive, that's the president, was invalid. It was also wrong in ruling that the appointment of Mr. Abrahams stood to be set aside as invalid. And it was also, of course, it was a gross error on the part of the court to rule that not simply on the issue of a conflict, whether a conflict or a potential conflict existed. Its ruling, if you read it very closely, says as long as Zuma is a president, the task of appointing an NPA head shall fall on the deputy president. That means that even if the NPA was to make a decision that all charges or all the charges that were contemplated against Zuma were to be discontinued, that the court judgment still stands that as long as he's president, he cannot appoint an NPA head. Mm-hmm. Now, that is an incompetent judgment because it goes way beyond what the issues that were presented to the courts were. You can't make a ruling of that nature to say, for as long as Zuma is a president, he cannot appoint an NPA head. That means he cannot perform constitutional duties that he's by law required to perform.
So in your opinion, it actually is a case of judicial overreach. And that being said, do you think that President Zuma's appeal will succeed?
It will succeed, but I'm shocked actually that his legal team supposedly confined itself to just one aspect of the judgment. I think all aspects of the judgment, including the issue of the settlement agreement, the issue of the appointment of Mr. Abrahams, and the issue of the conflict, and also the scope of the court's order. It went beyond what the courts are normally allowed to do. You can't come up with a ruling that says, for as long as he's the president. What they are supposed to have said is that for as long as the conflict or potential conflict exists, confine itself to that, to say if the conflict exists or the potential conflict persists, then the president could not do certain functions, perform certain functions. But you can't say for as long as he's the president.
Mm-hmm. And just lastly, some other commentators and analysts have said that President Zuma is being accused of exercising some sort of delay tactics in appointing so many NDPP heads in the past few years. Do you agree with that? That is delay tactics, or is he just exercising his prerogative?
Delay tactics with what objective? I mean, if the issue is that he's employing delay tactics to stall his prosecution, that is a false premise, because remember that the charges against Zuma were withdrawn by Mr. Mkhothedi. Mm-hmm. It was not Zuma who withdrew the charges, it was Mr. Mkhothedi. So for 7 years, the decision not to go ahead with the prosecution was not that of Mr. Zuma, it was that of Mr. Mkhothedi. And prior to that, Judge Nicholson had thrown out the case, essentially finding that there was abuse of process in the Zuma prosecution. Prior to that, Judge Msimanga had also made a decision that there was an abuse of process in the Zuma prosecution. Prior to that, the NPA itself said they had a case against Zuma, prima facie case, but they will not prosecute him. So if a person tells you that Zuma has employed delaying tactics, tell them that's a false statement. They are actually lying because they ignore the record and make political statements. Let's start looking at the record very carefully, and whatever the analysts do, they must be measured in their analysis. They must be accurate in presenting the facts and the law, and that will advance the discourse and the debate that we as South African citizens ought to have.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Vogue Africa this morning. That was Mr. Paul Ngubeni, a legal expert, joining us there on the phone line, giving us his views regarding President Zuma seeking a leave to appeal the court judgment that rules that as long as he's president, he cannot appoint a head of the NPA.